introduction. Got it. Just to also say that my colleague Danny Burns is with us today, and he's actually the director of the Clarissa program. So he'll be with you in the breakout rooms. So you can also tap him for further knowledge on the program. So I hope you can all hear me and you can see the right screen. Yep. Okay, brilliant. So first of all, thanks very much to the organizers, to Edward, Olivia, and Michael for the invitation to share some of our work in the Clarissa program in this really interesting series, which, yeah, I really congratulate you on the opportunity it provides. So I'll be sharing some thinking and some reflections on the methodologies, particularly the action research side of the program today, but just to acknowledge there are many, many people behind the presentation and involved in the program, and some of the people named here have also contributed directly to this presentation. So what is the Clarissa program? The starting point really for the program is a recognition that the pathways through which children end up in harmful and hazardous work, so the worst forms of child labor, are complex and are not well understood. Yeah, so mediated by many different actors, all the way from local to global supply chains. And so with this weak evidence base and acknowledging that the child labor programming system tends to not include children and other stakeholders' perspectives, we aim in Clarissa to build a rigorous evidence base based on lived experience. So the opportunity here is to use participatory and child-centered programming to both understand the dynamics of the worst forms of child labor, but really importantly, to also innovate, right? So to identify solutions that are based on that lived experience. Excuse me. So Clarissa is an FCDO funded project, and we are a big family of partners working together, whom you can see on this slide. The key thing has been from the beginning to build a partnership that brings together intentionally colleagues who are deeply engaged in the work in context, and colleagues from the NGO sector, such as Child Hope, Telesom, and Consortium for Street Children, who are experts in child rights and child participation, with the long-standing history of work at IDS around participatory methodologies. So it's very much a program that sits between the world of implementation and development and research. And we have all these amazing partners working in Nepal and Bangladesh who have deep experience of the issues in the places where we are working. So the reason we have this partnership, as I've explained, is because action research is our main implementation modality, and that's what I want to focus on today. So it's not simply a way to generate knowledge about the kinds of issues that we're dealing with, but also it is a way to generate innovation. So we take very seriously the need to move to action and to think about actionable knowledge as what we generate through processes of participatory action research. And this is with children themselves, but also with employers and other stakeholders engaged in the broader dynamics of worst forms of child labor in the sectors where we work. So as a program that is intentionally adaptive, right? So recognizing that responding to the very specific realities of children in these places requires that we listen, and requires that we learn, and requires that we deepen our questions and our methodologies with participants. What I'm going to talk you through is kind of the process that we've been going through in this deepening of our programming approach and getting to the kind of specific methods that we're using. So we initiated with some scoping and mapping exercises, which helped us to understand better the dynamics that we were interested in engaging in, And that led us to working in the leather sector, in the Hazaribagh slum in Dhaka in Bangladesh, and the adult entertainment sector in Kathmandu. And in particular, just to show you some specificity around the work in Bangladesh, our partners at Gram Bangla led a really detailed mapping of the whole supply chain, the whole leather supply chain, which revealed that children are engaged in most of, so 103 out of 107 processes. So this really detailed look at every single one of the steps, which produced in its own right a better understanding of the working conditions, and illustrated that children are mainly engaged in informal, unregulated, small family run, etc. businesses. And so what this did was helped us as a program to think about the focus and into these informal and more hidden domains. Yeah. And in fact, initially, part of our assumption was that we would be working more on global supply chains and large brands. So this enabled a shift, right? So one of the key points is in taking a participatory approach in listening, we can also stay more focused on where things are really hard to see and understand. So then moving into the next phase of work and beginning to actually engage more directly with children and other stakeholders to gather evidence around the system dynamics to help us identify entry points for action. And so we talk a lot about the quality of our participatory processes, no? And this is something I think to come back to in the breakout rooms. The extent to which it's possible to deepen participation in a way that moves beyond listening and moves simply beyond kind of consultation into building true ownership. And our methodologies using action research are really illustrating that it's the action, right, that generates that deeper ownership. So our intention, and this is the question I think that we can discuss further, the extent to which it's possible and the tensions which come with it, is to enable engagement throughout all of the moments and processes in the program. Yeah. So in both countries, this the work with children specifically initiated through an extensive life story collection and then analysis process. Yeah. So in each of the countries, the team worked with a group of children to collect 400 life stories in each of the countries. And to begin with, some of our team members were really, I guess, questioning whether it was possible for children to really do this work. Yeah. And what they've learned and what we've all learned through the process is not only is it possible, but that through the process, as this quote here illustrates, through in fact the engagement of collecting and listening to other people's stories, we're already starting to see some outcomes in terms of the way that builds empathy between children. So once these stories are collected, we then move into a systemic analysis process. So the children themselves are facilitated to work with a group of stories, so in trios, working with about, in the case of Nepal, they had 15 stories each, and actually going through and looking at all of the causal dynamics, right? What was leading to what in the experience of children, and starting to draw small system maps of those dynamics. And then looking at the issues across this really, really rich set of experiences, identifying and clustering those issues. And then that leads into pulling together all of these small systems maps and small dynamics of causal links into a large system map, which is essentially the children's interpretation of how the dynamics play out. Yeah. And there's a whole, the methodology, which is developed by my colleague Danny, who's on the call as well. This is the first time it's been used extensively in the context of child labor. Yeah, so a huge amount of learning as to how this process works. So to give you a sense of kind of what emerged from this process, the children then spend some time prioritizing which of the dynamics they then want to respond to through an action research process. Yeah. And so these are some of the examples of the dynamics that were showing up in the case of children working in the adult entertainment sector in Kathmandu. And you can see how it's not simply an issue, but it's actually the relationship between family dynamics. So there's quite a lot here about what's happening in families and how that then relates to and links into the type of work and the conditions of work they end up in. Yeah. So this is all, we're just about to publish the 2 reports from the 2 countries which talk through in detail this process and what was revealed through it. So with these issues or these causal dynamics identified, the children are then moving into the action research proper, if you like. And I think we have 5 groups up and running in Kathmandu and 3, I think, currently in Bangladesh. So taking those issues, they then move into a process of deepening the understanding and generating further local evidence on those particular dynamics, right? The push and pull factors. And so they'll move into a process of action research, which broadly speaking looks like this. We imagine these processes will run for 12 to 18 months, but it's an interesting reflection in terms of how do you build programs that can enable these processes to open up and emerge, and for children to take the actions that they feel can be taken in response to their understanding, and at the same time manage the realities of program timeframes. So they've just been spending the first while in these groups building trust and deepening the relationships within the groups, and they'll then move into this iterative cycle shown up here, where they'll then deepen the analysis of the particular issue that they're interested in. And then they will, through that understanding that they build, they'll generate their own theories of change, take actions, and reflect and learn from those actions. Yeah. And so this is the phase of the program we're now in. This is a methodology that we've used in many other programs and contexts. And in Clarissa, we have the opportunity to have about 34 action research groups, both with children, but also with employers. Yeah. And the employers are focused largely on ways in which they can improve their business practices, and they can navigate all of the difficulties that they face in order to improve working conditions for children, or indeed potentially not employ them. We also have children's advocacy groups and children's research groups, but I won't go into those details now. So that's kind of where we are in terms of the implementation processes. What I wanted to also add is that one of the innovations in this program, and this is particularly work that I'm most involved in and really excited about, is we get the opportunity to also evaluate how the methodology works. Yeah. So we have an evaluation question, which is around how and what context and for whom can action research generate effective innovations in the context of the worst forms of child labor. And you can see there that the second part of the question has been scratched out, because initially we had hoped to have enough time in the program to also intentionally move into scaling some of the potential responses produced through the action research groups. Given COVID and given budget cuts we faced from FCDO, we're unsure how much of that is going to be possible. We're using a realist evaluation approach. I'm happy to talk to people more if you have questions about what a realist evaluation approach looks like. But essentially, it's trying to understand the mechanisms that generate change. So how does action research really work? And we started by doing a realist review, which is a form of literature review. And through that have generated some initial what we call program theories about how we understand action research to work. And these theories are mapped onto the phases of the action research cycle. So the concientización theory, which those of you who are familiar with Paulo Freire's work, is really this idea that as people analyze their own situation and then engage in critical dialogue, this builds ownership and desire for them to actually take action. Yeah. The diversity theory is really focused on the way in which we make the most of diversity in group processes. And it assumes that building relational safe space can support this diversity to generate new ideas. And within this theory is also the idea of conflict as a generative process within participatory methodologies. And then finally, the praxis theory, which is really about prefigurative politics, if you're familiar with that theoretical approach, which is that taking action is itself a form of gaining knowledge and agency for change. So these are theoretically some of the areas that we're exploring through the research, the evaluation research in the program. And so just to give you a snapshot, we've already started to do the work of looking at these theories in the context of the specific moments of implementation. So the life story collection and analysis process that I described, we've now done an evaluation of that and have used a range of data sources coming through the process to examine whether and how these program theories are actually playing out in reality. So I think to end, just to come back to these questions about what does it mean to have deep or strong participation, yeah, and in the context of child labor. So I guess moving into the breakout rooms, part of what the invitation here is to think about how we deepen and in which contexts this can be done, this can't be done, and where I guess some of the tensions and challenges lie. We've had some really interesting discussions about the challenge of working with employers and the difficulty of engaging in participatory research on very difficult issues and hidden issues, right? And so how do you overcome that? And really what it takes to build trust and have the skills to really support collective analysis. So for me, one of the kind of cutting edge things about participatory research is ensuring that people are engaged in analysis, right? So how do we do that? These are some of the questions I think that would be interested to engage with in the breakout rooms. So I think I will leave it there.
Thank you so much, Marina. So